I was sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning, sipping my coffee and scrolling through emails, when I saw the official letter from the city's code enforcement department. My heart immediately started racing as I read the subject line. Property inspection notice. Immediate compliance required. You won't believe what happened to me, so please like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what country you're watching from. My name is Margaret Dixon. I'm 53 years old, and I've lived in this same house for over 20 years. I've always prided myself on keeping up with maintenance. Sure, the paint on my front porch could use a touch-up, and maybe a few of my shutters have seen better days, but my house is hardly falling apart. As I read through the formal language of the notice, my hands began to shake slightly. According to this letter, someone had filed multiple complaints claiming my property was in severe disrepair and posed a safety hazard to the neighborhood. The morning sunlight streaming through my kitchen window suddenly felt harsh against the white paper. I could hear the familiar sounds of my neighborhood waking up: dogs barking, car doors slamming, the distant hum of lawnmowers. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even, which made this letter feel even more surreal. Who would do this, and why? I immediately thought of Harold Brennan, my next-door neighbor of 15 years. Harold had always been particular about his property. His lawn looked like something out of a magazine, with perfectly trimmed hedges and not a single weed in sight. Lately, I'd noticed him standing on his front porch more often, coffee mug in hand, staring in the direction of my house. At first, I thought he was just being friendly, maybe waiting to wave good morning. But now, reading this letter, those lingering stares felt different. More calculating, more judgmental. The code enforcement officer, according to the letter, would be conducting an inspection next Friday. That gave me less than 10 days to figure out what was happening and prepare for whatever they might find. My stomach churned as I imagined strangers walking around my property, clipboard in hand, looking for violations I didn't even know existed. I needed to call my daughter Sarah Dixon right away. Sarah had always been my voice of reason, the one who could help me think through problems logically when my emotions got the better of me. At 28, she had inherited my stubborn streak, but paired it with a calmness that I sometimes envied. She worked as a project manager for a local consulting firm and had this wonderful way of breaking down overwhelming situations into manageable pieces. Then there was Linda Hartwell, my closest friend and neighbor from 3 houses down. Linda and I had been walking together every morning for the past 5 years, and she knew this neighborhood better than anyone. If someone was spreading rumors or filing complaints, Linda would have heard about it. She had this incredible network of information that seemed to flow naturally through casual conversations at the grocery store, the post office, and during our morning walks. As I sat there holding the letter, I felt a strange mix of anger and vulnerability washing over me. This was my home, the place where I'd raised my children, where I'd built my life after my divorce 8 years ago. Every room held memories. Sarah's high school graduation party in the living room, quiet Sunday mornings reading on the back deck, the satisfaction of painting the guest bedroom myself last spring. The thought that someone had been watching my house, cataloging what they perceived as flaws, and then reporting me to the city felt like such a violation. I started mentally walking through my property, trying to see it through the eyes of someone looking for problems. Yes, the wooden fence along the back had a few loose boards that I kept meaning to fix. The gutters probably needed cleaning, and there was that small section of siding near the garage where the paint had started to chip after last winter's ice storms. But falling apart? A safety hazard? Those words felt so extreme, so unfair. I thought about all the real problems in our neighborhood. The abandoned house 2 blocks over with the broken windows. The apartment building on Maple Street where the landlord never seemed to fix anything. Why was someone targeting my house? I stood up and walked to my front window, pulling back the sheer curtain to look outside. Harold's house stood perfectly pristine next door, every detail immaculate. His American flag hung at precisely the right angle. His mailbox looked like it had been painted yesterday, and his driveway was so clean I could probably eat off it. Looking at his house and then mentally comparing it to mine, I started to understand how the contrast might bother someone like Harold. But that still didn't give him the right to involve the city without ever talking to me first. In all our years as neighbors, he'd never once mentioned any concerns about my property. We weren't close friends, but we'd always been cordial. I'd accepted packages for him when he was traveling, and he'd helped me move my heavy trash bins to the curb after I'd hurt my back a few years ago. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that Harold was behind these complaints. But I needed proof before I could do anything about it, and I needed to understand exactly what he'd told the Code Enforcement Office, because the inspection was coming whether I was ready or not. I picked up my phone to call Sarah, my fingers hesitating over her number. Part of me felt embarrassed to admit that I might be in trouble with the city, that someone found my housekeeping standards so lacking they'd filed official complaints. But Sarah had always been supportive, and I knew she'd help me figure out how to handle this situation with dignity. As I waited for her to answer, I looked around my kitchen, at the cheerful yellow walls I'd painted 2 summers ago, the herb garden visible through the window that I tended carefully each morning, the family photos arranged on the refrigerator. This wasn't the home of someone who let their property fall apart. This was the home of someone who cared, who tried, who deserved better than anonymous complaints and official letters. The trap I'd missed finally sprang shut. "Sarah, thank God you answered," I said when she picked up on the 3rd ring. "I need your help with something really strange that's happening." "What's wrong? You sound upset." Sarah's voice immediately shifted to that protective tone she'd used since we were kids whenever I was in trouble. I explained everything: the code enforcement letter, my suspicions about Harold, the upcoming inspection that had me spiraling with anxiety. As I talked, I found myself pacing around my kitchen, running my fingers along surfaces that suddenly felt inadequate under potential official scrutiny. "Wait, back up," Sarah interrupted. "You really think Harold would do something like that without talking to you first? I mean, I know he's particular about his yard, but filing complaints seems pretty extreme. I can't think of who else it would be." "And you know how he gets about property values and neighborhood appearance?" I paused at my kitchen window, looking out at Harold's perfect lawn. "The timing feels weird too. These complaints started right after I had that big branch fall during the storm last month. It took me 2 weeks to get someone out to remove it properly." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Okay, so what if it is Harold? What are you going to do about it?" That was the question I'd been dreading. Confronting Harold directly felt terrifying, but ignoring the situation wasn't an option with an inspection looming. "I don't know. Part of me wants to march over there right now and ask him point blank. But what if I'm wrong? What if it's someone else entirely, and I end up accusing an innocent neighbor? Or what if you're right, and he denies it anyway?" Sarah added. "Look, before you do anything confrontational, why don't you get more information? Can you call the Code Enforcement Office and find out exactly what the complaint said?" I hadn't thought of that. "You think they'd tell me?" "It's about your property. You have a right to know what you're being accused of." Sarah's voice grew more confident as she worked through the problem. "Get the details first, then you'll know if it sounds like something Harold would say, or if the complaints mention things only certain neighbors could see." The idea of calling the city office made my stomach churn, but Sarah was right. I needed facts, not assumptions. "Will you stay on the line while I call them? I can do a 3-way call." "Of course. But Margaret, Try to stay calm when you talk to them. You don't want to sound defensive or angry, even though you have every right to be. I took a deep breath and dialed the number from the letter, my hands slightly shaking as Sarah's line went quiet but stayed connected. When the code enforcement office answered, I explained that I'd received a notice about complaints regarding my property and wanted to understand the specific issues raised. The clerk was surprisingly helpful. "Let me pull up your file," she said, and I heard typing in the background. "Okay, we have 3 separate complaints filed over the past 6 weeks. The first one mentions peeling paint on the garage side of the house, overflowing gutters, and what the caller described as general deterioration of exterior maintenance standards." My heart sank. Those were exactly the issues I'd been putting off, described in language that sounded formal and disapproving. "What about the other complaints?" The second complaint was filed 2 weeks later, adding concerns about debris in the yard. Apparently, there was mention of storm damage not being addressed promptly. The most recent complaint, filed just last week, suggests that the property maintenance issues are getting worse rather than better. "Did the caller leave a name?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. All 3 complaints were filed anonymously, but they came from the same phone number. I can't give you that information, but I can tell you the caller claimed to be a concerned neighbor. After I hung up, Sarah's voice came back on the line immediately. "Well, that definitely sounds like it could be Harold. Those are all things he'd noticed from his yard, and filing multiple complaints over time sounds like him too. Methodical and persistent." I felt a mixture of anger and hurt washing over me. "Sarah, I just don't understand why he wouldn't talk to me first. We've been neighbors for 8 years. I thought we had a decent relationship." "Some people are just conflict avoidant until they reach a breaking point," Sarah said gently. "Or maybe he's been stewing about it for longer than you realize, and finally decided to take action the only way he felt comfortable." "By going behind my back to the city?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "I'm not defending him, Margaret. I'm just trying to help you understand his mindset so you can figure out how to handle this." Sarah paused. "Look, you've got 2 choices here. You can confront him directly about the complaints, or you can focus on fixing the issues and dealing with Harold later." I knew she was right, but the betrayal still stung. As we talked through my options, I heard a car door slam outside. Through my kitchen window, I saw Harold getting out of his sedan, carrying grocery bags toward his front door. He looked the same as always. Neat khaki pants, button-down shirt, every gray hair in place. "He's right there," I told Sarah. "Harold just got home." "What do you want to do?" I watched Harold disappear into his house, my emotions churning between anger and disappointment. Before I could answer Sarah, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Harold had left one grocery bag on his front porch, and as he bent to pick it up, a piece of paper fell out of his jacket pocket. Even from my window, I could see it was official looking, with the same city letterhead as my code enforcement notice. But this letter was different. And when I realized what Harold was actually up to, everything I thought I knew about this situation completely fell apart. "Sarah, I need to call you back," I whispered into the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. Something's not right here. I hung up and pressed myself closer to the kitchen window, straining to see what was on that paper. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Harold's perfectly manicured lawn, making it difficult to make out details, but the official city seal was unmistakable. Harold bent down to retrieve the document, his movements careful and deliberate as always. But there was something different about his posture, a tension I'd never noticed before. As he straightened up, Harold glanced directly toward my house, Our eyes met through the glass, and instead of his usual polite nod, his face darkened with what looked like genuine fear. He quickly stuffed the paper back into his jacket and hurried inside, leaving his grocery bag forgotten on the porch. My mind raced through possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. If Harold was filing complaints about my property, why would he be carrying around official city correspondence? And why did he look so panicked when he saw me watching? I grabbed my jacket and headed for the front door, determined to get answers. But before I could step outside, my phone rang. Danny's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, I just got the weirdest call," he said without preamble. "Someone from the city called my work number asking about the structural integrity of your house. They wanted to know if I'd done any recent inspections or repairs there." My blood turned to ice. "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth, that I helped you with some minor fixes last month, but nothing major. The house is solid." His voice carried a note of concern I rarely heard from my usually easygoing son. "Mom, how did they even get my work number? And why are they asking about structural issues? Your notice was just about exterior maintenance." The pieces of this puzzle were shifting into a picture I didn't want to see. "Danny, I think there's more going on here than just neighbor complaints. Can you come over?" "I need to show you something. I'm already in my truck. Be there in 20. While I waited for Danny, I called Sarah back and filled her in on these new developments. Her usual calm demeanor cracked slightly as I described Harold's strange behavior and the mysterious phone call to Danny's workplace. "Margaret, this is starting to sound less like a petty neighbor dispute and more like something systematic," Sarah said slowly. "Someone's been doing their homework, gathering information about you and your property. The question is why." 20 minutes later, Danny's pickup truck rumbled into my driveway. He strode up the walkway with the purposeful gait he'd inherited from his father, his tool belt jangling with each step. Even at 32, when Danny was worried about something, he reverted to the same focused expression he'd worn as a little boy, trying to solve a particularly challenging Lego set. "Show me this notice," he said, settling his large frame into my kitchen chair. I handed him the code enforcement letter and watched his contractor-trained eyes scan every line. His jaw tightened as he read. "Mom, these aren't random complaints. Look at this language. Structural concerns, potential safety hazards, declining property values in the neighborhood. This reads like someone's building a case, not just reporting peeling paint." "A case for what?" Before Danny could answer, we both heard the distinctive sound of Harold's screen door opening. Through the window, we watched him walk purposefully to his mailbox, but instead of checking his mail, he pulled out his phone and made a call. Even from this distance, we could see the agitation in his gestures. "That's not normal mailbox behavior," Danny observed dryly. "Nothing about this situation feels normal anymore." I sank into the chair across from my son, suddenly feeling every one of my 58 years. "Danny, what if Harold isn't the one filing these complaints? What if someone's using him somehow?" Danny's expression grew more serious. "Or what if Harold's involved in something bigger than neighbor disputes?" He stood up and walked to the window, studying Harold's house with the analytical eye he usually reserved for construction sites. "Mom, have you noticed any other unusual activity in the neighborhood lately? Strange cars, people taking photos, anything like that?" I started to shake my head, then stopped. "Actually, yes. Last week I saw a car parked across the street for several hours. The driver seemed to be taking notes or photos, but I assumed it was someone doing a real estate appraisal for the Hendersons' house." "What did the car look like?" "Dark blue sedan, maybe a Honda, pretty generic looking." Danny nodded grimly. "And you said Harold had official city paperwork with him just now?" It looked official. Same letterhead as my notice. We stood together at the kitchen window, watching Harold pace back and forth in his living room while talking on the phone. His normally rigid posture had dissolved into anxious movement, and he kept looking toward my house. Danny, I think we need to find out what Harold's really involved in, I said quietly. Because something tells me those code enforcement complaints are just the beginning. My son turned to face me, his expression grim. Mom, I think you're right, and I have a feeling we're about to discover that whatever Harold's gotten himself into, it's about to get a whole lot worse for both of you. As if summoned by our words, Harold's front door opened again. This time, he walked directly toward our house, that mysterious piece of paper clutched in his trembling hand. But the expression on his face as he approached wasn't the look of someone coming to confess to filing complaints. It was the look of someone who was absolutely terrified. Harold's knock came soft but urgent, nothing like his usual authoritative rapping. Through the peephole, I could see him shifting his weight from foot to foot. That paper crumpled now in his sweaty palm. The terror in his eyes was unmistakable. Should I answer it? I whispered to Danny, though I'm not sure why I was whispering. We have to, but Mom, let me do most of the talking, okay? I opened the door to find Harold looking like he'd aged 10 years since this morning. His usually perfectly pressed shirt was wrinkled, and there was a slight tremor in his hands that I'd never noticed before. Margaret, He stopped, seeming to notice Danny standing protectively behind me. Oh, hello, Danny. Harold. Danny's tone was carefully neutral. What brings you by? Harold's eyes darted between us, then back toward his house. May I come in, please? I think we need to talk, and I'd rather not do it where anyone can see us. The vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the Harold who'd lectured me about property values or complained about my sprinkler hitting his sidewalk. This was someone genuinely frightened. Of course. I stepped back, and Harold practically hurried inside. Once the door was closed, Harold seemed to collapse inward. He sank into my living room chair without being invited and buried his face in his hands. Margaret, I owe you an enormous apology, but more than that, I think I've gotten us both into serious trouble. Danny and I exchanged glances. What kind of trouble, Harold? I asked, settling onto the couch across from him. Harold lifted his head, and I was startled to see his eyes were wet. The code enforcement complaints. Yes, I filed the first one, back in February. I was irritated about your fence, and I thought... He shook his head. It was petty and stupid, and I regretted it almost immediately. My chest tightened with a familiar anger, but something in Harold's demeanor kept me from exploding. But you kept filing them. No. Harold's voice was firm. Margaret, I filed one complaint in February. Just one. About the fence. But then the letters started coming to you, and they kept getting more detailed, more frequent. I started wondering who else might be complaining, because the issues they were citing weren't things I'd ever mentioned. Danny leaned forward. What do you mean? Harold uncrumpled the paper in his hands. This came in my mail today. It's a notice that there's going to be a city inspection of both our properties next week. Both of them, Margaret, mine and yours. I felt my world tilt slightly. Both? Why would they inspect your house? Because apparently someone has been filing complaints about my property too. Harold's voice cracked. 4 of them, dating back to March, claiming my roof is damaged, my driveway is cracking, that I have foundation issues. None of it is true, but Margaret, whoever's doing this knows details about both our houses that you'd only notice if you were watching very closely. The implications hit me like cold water. Someone had been using Harold's initial complaint as cover to target both of us. But why? Danny stood up and began pacing, his contractor's mind clearly working through the puzzle. Harold, you said you got a phone call this morning. Who was it? Harold's face went pale. Someone claiming to be from the city planning office. They wanted to schedule a preliminary assessment before the formal inspection. But when I asked for their name and callback number, they got evasive and hung up. That's not standard procedure, Danny said grimly. I stared at Harold, trying to reconcile this frightened, remorseful man with the neighbor I'd been quietly feuding with for months. Harold, why didn't you tell me about this sooner? If someone's been using your complaint to target both of us? Because I was embarrassed. Harold's admission came out in a rush. I was ashamed that I'd been so petty about the fence, and then when the other complaints kept appearing, I was afraid you'd think I was lying about not filing them. And honestly, Margaret, we haven't exactly had the kind of relationship where we confide in each other. He was right about that. I realized I couldn't even remember the last time Harold and I had had a real conversation, beyond polite greetings and complaints about property boundaries. So what do we do now? I asked. Danny stopped pacing. We need to figure out who's really behind this and why they want both of your houses flagged by the city. Harold nodded eagerly. That's exactly what I was thinking. Margaret, I know I have no right to ask this after the mess I've created, but would you be willing to work with me to get to the bottom of this? Because I have a terrible feeling that whoever's doing this isn't finished with us yet. Before I could answer, Harold's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and went white. What is it? Danny asked. Harold held up his phone with a shaking hand. Text message from an unknown number. It says, "Stop asking questions or the next complaints will be about code violations that actually exist." The three of us stared at each other in stunned silence. Someone was not only targeting our properties, but watching us closely enough to know that Harold was investigating. Harold, I said quietly, I think we're dealing with something much bigger than neighborhood complaints. The silence that followed Harold's revelation stretched like a taut wire between us. I found myself studying the man I'd dismissed as a simple busybody, seeing the genuine fear etched in the lines around his eyes. The afternoon sun slanted through my kitchen window, casting long shadows across the table where Harold's phone lay face up, the threatening message still glowing on its screen. Danny was the first to break the silence. May I? He gestured toward the phone, and Harold nodded numbly. Danny picked it up carefully, his weathered hands surprisingly gentle as he examined the message. No caller ID sent from a web-based service. Professional. Professional? I heard my voice crack slightly. What do you mean, professional? I mean someone who knows how to cover their tracks. Danny set the phone down and looked directly at me. Margaret, this isn't some neighborhood grudge anymore. Someone's running a coordinated campaign against both your properties, and they've got resources. Harold had been unusually quiet, his fingers drumming nervously against my kitchen table. The sound was getting on my nerves, but I realized it was probably his way of processing fear. I'd never seen him anything but confident and slightly pompous before. Harold, I said, surprising myself with how gently I spoke his name. Tell us everything. From the beginning, every phone call, every interaction you've had with anyone claiming to be from the city. He looked up at me, and I saw something I'd never expected from Harold Morrison. Gratitude. Not the polite, surface-level thanks of neighbors who barely tolerate each other, but genuine relief that someone was finally listening. It started about 3 weeks ago, he began, his voice steadier now. A woman called, very professional sounding. Said she was following up on my complaint about your fence. But Margaret, she knew details I hadn't mentioned in my original report. She knew about the specific measurements, about where your property line actually falls, even about that old oak tree that overhangs both our yards. I felt a chill run down my spine. I never told anyone those details except Danny when he helped me research the property boundaries last year. Danny's eyebrows shot up. You didn't mention that research to anyone else? Not even casually? No, of course not. Why would I? But even as I said it, I was thinking, had I mentioned it to someone? In the grocery store line, maybe? Or at the hardware store? Harold continued, his voice gaining momentum. Then she started asking about other properties in the neighborhood, specifically yours, Margaret. She wanted to know if I'd noticed any maintenance issues, any problems with your house that might warrant city attention. And you told her? I tried to keep the accusation out of my voice, but Harold winced anyway. I'm ashamed to say I did. I was still angry about the fence situation, and I thought maybe if the city looked at both our properties, they'd see that your fence really was the problem. Harold's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I never imagined it would snowball like this. Danny had been listening intently, occasionally nodding. Now he leaned forward. Harold, did this woman ever meet with you in person? No, always phone calls. But she seemed to know our neighborhood very well. She mentioned the Hendersons' new driveway, the Patel's garden renovation, even Mrs. Chen's fence repair from last summer. I froze. The Hendersons lived 6 houses down from me. The Patels were around the corner. Mrs. Chen was on the next street over. Harold, how would someone from the city planning office know about all those projects? They wouldn't, Danny said grimly. Not unless they were keeping very detailed surveillance on this entire area. The implications of that statement settled over us like a heavy blanket. Someone had been watching our neighborhood, cataloging improvements and changes, building profiles of properties and residents. But why? Harold's phone buzzed again, and all 3 of us jumped. This time, Harold's hands were shaking too badly to pick it up. I reached over and checked the message, my stomach dropping as I read it aloud. 3 people asking questions is 3 too many. Stop now or face the consequences. Danny stood up abruptly, moving to my kitchen window that faced Harold's house. They're watching us right now, he said quietly. I joined him at the window, scanning the street with new eyes. Everything looked normal. Mrs. Patterson walking her dog 3 houses down. The mail truck making its afternoon rounds, a utility van parked near the corner, where workers seemed to be checking power lines. The van, I said suddenly. How long has that van been there? Harold came to stand beside us, squinting through his glasses. I don't remember seeing it this morning, but Margaret, utility vehicles are here all the time. It could be completely innocent. Or it could be how they're watching us, Danny said. Perfect cover. Park a utility van anywhere, and neighbors assume it belongs there. I felt a surge of anger replacing my fear. I'm tired of feeling hunted in my own neighborhood. Harold, you said you wanted to work together to figure this out. What exactly did you have in mind? Harold straightened, and I caught a glimpse of the man who'd built a successful accounting practice and never backed down from a property dispute. I think we need to document everything. Every call, every message, every interaction. Build our own case. And then what? I asked. Take it to the real city planning office? Actually, Danny said slowly, I think we need to be more strategic than that. If someone's going to these lengths to target your properties, there's got to be a reason. Something that makes your houses specifically valuable or problematic for someone. I stared at him. You think this is about our actual properties, not just harassment? Think about it, Margaret. Your house sits on one of the largest lots in the neighborhood. Harold's is right next to yours, also oversized by today's standards. Together, your two properties would make a very attractive development opportunity. Harold went pale. You think someone's trying to force us to sell? Or trying to get the city to condemn your properties so they can buy them cheap at auction? Danny said. It's happened before in other neighborhoods. The pieces began clicking together in my mind. The detailed knowledge of our properties. The escalating complaints designed to create expensive problems. The surveillance to make sure their plan was working. But who would have the resources to do something like this? I asked. Harold's phone rang, the sudden sound making all of us jump. He looked at the caller ID and frowned. It's the same number that called me this morning, the fake city planning office. I looked at Danny, then at Harold. Answer it, I said, but put it on speaker. It's time we heard this person for ourselves. Harold's finger hovered over the accept button, trembling slightly. Are you sure about this? Answer it, Danny said quietly. But Harold, don't let them know we're listening. Harold took a deep breath and accepted the call, his finger finding the speaker button as he did. A woman's voice filled my kitchen, professional and smooth, but with something cold underneath that made my skin crawl. Mr. Morrison, I understand you've been asking questions about the complaints filed against your property. Harold looked at us, his eyes wide, before responding. I just wanted to understand the process. Mr. Morrison, I think you should be more concerned about your own situation than asking questions about procedures. We've had reports of some very serious violations at your address. What violations? Harold's voice cracked slightly. I think that's better discussed in person. I'll be conducting a preliminary inspection of your property tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Please be available. The line went dead. We stared at each other in stunned silence. Then Danny grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. Where are you going? I asked. To get a closer look at that utility van before it disappears. Because I have a feeling tomorrow morning's inspection is going to be very different from what Harold's expecting. After Danny left, Harold and I sat in uncomfortable silence, both of us processing what we'd just heard. The woman's voice kept echoing in my mind, so professional, yet somehow threatening. Margaret, Harold said finally, his hands wrapped around his now cold coffee mug. I owe you an enormous apology. All this time, I thought you were the one making those calls about my property. I reached across the table and patted his arm. We both got played, Harold. That's exactly what they wanted. Us fighting each other instead of figuring out what was really happening. But I was so convinced it was you. The timing, the details they knew about my house. He shook his head. I even started writing down everything wrong with your place, thinking I was just giving you a taste of your own medicine. The important thing is, we know the truth now, I said, though part of me was still processing the betrayal I'd felt these past weeks. The question is, what do we do about tomorrow morning? Harold looked toward my window, where we could see his house across the yard. What if Danny's wrong? What if it really is just code enforcement? Harold, when was the last time a city inspector called you personally to schedule an appointment? He was quiet for a moment. They usually just show up, and they definitely don't call from personal phone numbers. The back door opened, and Danny came in, slightly out of breath. His face was grim as he pulled out his phone. The van's gone, he said, scrolling through something on his screen. But I got pictures before it left. Look at this. He showed us a photo of a white utility van. At first glance, it looked official enough, but when I looked closer, something seemed off. "The logo looks wrong," I said, squinting at the image. "It's close, but not quite right." "Exactly. And look at this." Danny swiped to another photo, this one showing the license plate clearly. I ran the plates through a lookup site. This van is registered to a private individual, not the city. Harold leaned forward. "So tomorrow morning?" "Tomorrow morning, someone's planning to show up at your house pretending to be a city inspector," Danny finished. "The question is why? Are they planning to plant evidence of violations? Take photos for some kind of scam? Or is this about gathering information for whoever's really behind this?" I felt a chill run down my spine. We can't let Harold face this alone. "I'm not planning to," Danny said, "but we need to be smart about this. If we confront them directly, we might spook them into disappearing before we figure out who's really behind this whole scheme." Harold's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and went pale. "What is it?" I asked. "It's from the same number that just called. They're asking me to make sure I'm alone tomorrow morning because the inspection needs to be conducted without distractions." Danny and I exchanged glances. "That settles it," Danny said. "This is definitely not legitimate. Real code enforcement officers don't care if your neighbors are around during an inspection." "So what's the plan?" Harold asked, and I could hear the worry in his voice. Danny was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We need to document everything, but more than that, we need to find out who sent them." "How do we do that?" "We let them come," Danny said, "but we're going to be ready for them." I looked between Danny and Harold, my heart racing. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we turn the tables. They've been watching you two, gathering information, making your lives miserable. Tomorrow morning, we watch them." Harold shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "But what if they're dangerous? What if this is more serious than we thought?" It was a question I'd been trying not to think about. The level of coordination, the fake city calls, the surveillance. This wasn't just a neighbor dispute anymore. "Then we need to know that too," Danny said quietly. "Because if we don't stop this tomorrow, it's only going to get worse." The three of us sat in Danny's living room as the evening light faded, the weight of tomorrow morning pressing down on us like a storm cloud. Harold kept checking his phone, as if the mysterious caller might provide more details about their fake inspection. "I keep thinking about what you said earlier," Harold murmured, setting his phone on the coffee table. "About this being more than just a neighbor dispute. What if we're in over our heads?" I watched my elderly neighbor fidget with his hands, and my heart ached for him. 3 months ago, Harold had been contentedly tending his garden and chatting over the fence about his tomatoes. Now he looked like a man under siege, shadows under his eyes and a nervous energy that never quite left him. "We won't know until we see what they're really after," Danny said, though I could hear the concern underlying his steady tone. "But Harold, you don't have to go through with this. We could call the real city inspector, report the fake calls, and let them handle it." "And then what?" Harold asked, his voice gaining strength. "Whoever's behind this just disappears and starts up again in a few weeks? Or moves on to targeting someone else?" He looked between Danny and me. "No, I think we need to see this through." I felt a surge of admiration for Harold's courage, mixed with my own growing anxiety about what we might be walking into. The fake van, the insistence that Harold be alone, the carefully orchestrated campaign of harassment, it all pointed to something much more calculated than a simple neighbor feud. Danny stood up and walked to his front window, peering through the blinds toward Harold's house. "The street looks normal tonight, No suspicious cars, no one lurking around. But that doesn't mean they're not watching from somewhere else. What's the plan exactly? I asked, joining Danny at the window. From here, I could see both my house and Harold's, peaceful in the gathering dusk. It was hard to believe that someone had been systematically trying to destroy Harold's peace of mind. I'll be in position early, Danny said. I can see Harold's front door from my upstairs window, and I'll have my camera ready. We document everything: who shows up, what they do, what they say. If they're legitimate, we'll know quickly enough. If they're not, then we have evidence. I finished. But Harold, what if they ask to come inside? What if they start making demands or threats? Harold's jaw tightened with determination I hadn't seen from him before. Then I stall them. I ask for identification, ask questions about their process, make them explain everything in detail. Real inspectors wouldn't mind taking their time to explain things properly. Danny nodded approvingly. Good thinking. And remember, you're not obligated to let anyone into your home without proper identification and advance notice from the real city office. As we talked through the details, I found myself studying Harold's face in the lamplight. The fear was still there, but it was tempered now with something else: resolve. This ordeal had pushed him to a breaking point, but instead of breaking, he was pushing back. There's one thing that's been bothering me, Harold said suddenly. The timing of all this. Why now? I've lived in that house for 15 years without any problems. Why would someone suddenly decide I'm a target? It was a question that had been nagging at me too. Has anything changed recently? Any new people in the neighborhood? Any work being done? Anything different at all? Harold was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Well, there was that survey crew that came through a couple months ago. They were measuring something, had all kinds of equipment. Said they were working for the city, updating property records or some such thing. Danny and I exchanged glances. Did they ask to look at your property specifically? Danny asked. Actually, yes. They were very interested in my lot lines, asked a lot of questions about my property boundaries. At the time, I thought they were just being thorough, but now... Harold trailed off, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. Now it sounds like someone was doing reconnaissance, I said, feeling pieces of a puzzle beginning to click together. Getting detailed information about your property before launching their harassment campaign. The room fell silent as we all absorbed the implications. This wasn't random, wasn't impulsive. Someone had been planning this for months, carefully gathering information and building their strategy to make Harold's life miserable. But why? Harold asked, voicing the question we were all thinking. What could anyone possibly gain from driving me out of my home? Before any of us could answer, Harold's phone buzzed with another text message. He picked it up, read it, and his face went completely white. What does it say? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Harold's hand was shaking as he held up the phone for us to see the message. Tomorrow's inspection is just the beginning. Hope you're ready to sell soon. The text message hung in the air between us like a threat made tangible. Harold set his phone down carefully, as if it might explode, and I watched the last traces of color drain from his face. Well, that settles it, Danny said, his voice tight with controlled anger. This isn't some overzealous neighbor filing complaints. Someone wants your property, Harold, and they're willing to play dirty to get it. Sarah leaned forward, her analytical mind clearly working. The survey crew, the systematic complaints, now this message. It's a coordinated effort to create a paper trail that makes your house look uninhabitable. I felt a surge of protective fury that surprised me with its intensity. They're trying to force you to sell below market value? Make you so miserable and scared that you'll take any offer just to escape. Harold picked up his coffee cup with trembling hands, but set it down again without drinking. I keep thinking this can't be real. That I'll wake up tomorrow and everything will be back to normal. He looked around at the three of us. But it is real, isn't it? Someone really is trying to steal my home. The word steal hung heavy in the room because that's exactly what this was. Not a legal theft, but something far more insidious. A systematic campaign to make Harold believe his only choice was to surrender the life he'd built. Harold? Sarah said gently. Have you noticed anyone showing unusual interest in your neighborhood? Anyone asking questions about properties for sale or developers looking around? He considered this carefully. There was a man, maybe 3 weeks ago. Well-dressed, expensive car. He knocked on my door asking if I'd ever considered selling. When I said no, he got pushy about it. Said the neighborhood was changing, and I might want to get out ahead of the curve. Danny's jaw tightened. Did he leave a card? Give you a name? He did, actually. I threw it away, but now I'm wondering if I should have kept it. I stood up and started pacing. The pieces were forming a picture I didn't like. This is bigger than just harassment. Someone sees value in your property that you might not even realize exists. But it's just an old house, Harold protested. Nothing special about it. Maybe not the house, Sarah said thoughtfully. But what about the land? Is your lot unusually large? Good location for development? Harold nodded slowly. It is a double lot. My grandfather bought 2 parcels back in the 1940s when land was cheap. But I never thought of it as particularly valuable. The room went quiet as we all processed this. A double lot in a neighborhood ripe for development would be worth significantly more than Harold probably realized, especially to someone looking to build something bigger. They're counting on you not knowing what you have, I said. The fake inspections, the harassment, even that text message. It's all designed to make you feel helpless and desperate. Harold's phone buzzed again, and we all tensed. He looked at it reluctantly, then held it up for us to see. This time, the message was even more direct. Inspection tomorrow at 9 a.m. Better start packing. That's it, Danny said, standing up abruptly. We're calling the police. Wait, Sarah said, holding up a hand. We need to think this through. If we call the police now, what exactly do we report? Annoying text messages? Fake inspections? We need more concrete evidence of who's behind this. I understood what she was getting at, but watching Harold shrink further into himself with each message was becoming unbearable. So what do you suggest? We just let them terrorize him? No, Sarah said firmly. We set a trap. Harold looked up with the first spark of hope I'd seen from him all evening. What kind of trap? Sarah's mind was clearly racing ahead, formulating a plan. Tomorrow morning, when this fake inspector shows up, we're all going to be there. We document everything, photos, video, audio if possible. We ask detailed questions and demand proper identification. Real inspectors have protocols they have to follow. And if they're fake? Danny asked. Then we've caught them in the act of impersonating a city official, which is a real crime with real consequences. Sarah looked around at all of us. But we need to be smart about this. No confrontations, no accusations, just documentation. Harold was nodding now, some of his earlier resolve returning. I like it. I'm tired of being afraid in my own home. I felt a mix of admiration and worry watching him. Are you sure you're up for this? It could get uncomfortable if they realize what we're doing. I'm sure, Harold said, and for the first time tonight, his voice was steady. These people have been counting on me being alone and scared. Tomorrow they're going to find out they miscalculated. Danny clapped Harold on the shoulder. That's the spirit. We'll all be there by 8:30 before they show up. As we started making concrete plans, I noticed something had shifted in the room's atmosphere. The fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. We had a course of action, and more importantly, Harold wasn't facing this alone. But as we prepared to leave, Harold's phone rang. Not a text this time, an actual call from an unknown number. He looked at us questioningly, and I nodded. We needed to know what we were dealing with. Harold answered, putting it on speaker so we could all hear. The voice that came through was smooth, professional, and somehow more threatening than any angry shout would have been. Mr. Harold, I hope you got our messages about tomorrow's inspection. I'd hate for there to be any complications. The blood drained from Harold's face as that smooth, professional voice filled his living room. I watched his hands begin to tremble again, all the resolve we'd just built up threatening to crumble under the weight of this new intimidation. What complications? Harold managed to ask, though his voice had gone thin and reedy. Well, we've received additional reports about your property. Structural concerns, potential safety hazards, the kind of issues that might require immediate action if they're confirmed during tomorrow's inspection. There was a pause, and I could practically hear the smile in the caller's voice. Of course, if you've decided to reconsider your position on certain neighborhood matters, perhaps some of these concerns could be overlooked. Danny's face had gone red with anger, and I could see him fighting the urge to grab the phone and give this person a piece of his mind. But Sarah caught his eye and shook her head firmly, reminding him of our plan to document everything. I'm not sure what you mean by neighborhood matters, Harold said, and I was proud of how he managed to keep his voice level. Oh, I think you do, Mr. Harold. Property boundaries, fence lines, those sorts of things, disputes that have gotten out of hand. But we can discuss all of that tomorrow during the inspection. 9 a.m. sharp. The line went dead, leaving us sitting in Harold's dimly lit living room with the weight of what we'd just heard. Harold set his phone down on the coffee table with shaking hands, and I watched as the fear crept back across his features. They're not even trying to hide it anymore, I said, breaking the heavy silence. That was practically extortion. Sarah was already pulling out her own phone. And we got it all on speaker. Harold, please tell me you have a way to record calls on that phone. Harold looked confused for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, there's an app Danny helped me install last year when I was having trouble with telemarketers. Perfect, Sarah said. Tomorrow, when they call or show up, we record everything. That conversation we just heard, combined with what we document tomorrow, should be more than enough evidence. But I could see that Harold's brief spark of courage was fading again. He was slumping back into his chair, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen him. What if they really can condemn my house? What if they have connections with the real city officials? Danny leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. Harold, listen to me. I've worked in construction for 15 years. I've dealt with real city inspectors, real code enforcement. What that person just described isn't how any of this works. Real inspectors don't call ahead making threats. They don't negotiate over property disputes, and they certainly don't offer to overlook safety hazards in exchange for favors. Danny's right, I added, moving to sit on the arm of Harold's chair. This whole thing reeks of amateur intimidation. Someone is counting on you not knowing how the system actually works. Harold was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands folded in his lap. When he finally looked up, there was something different in his eyes. Not quite the fear we'd been seeing, but not confidence either. More like a tired determination. You know what the worst part is? he said quietly. For 43 years, I've lived in this house. I've been a good neighbor, minded my own business, helped people when they needed it. And now someone thinks they can just take that away from me because I won't move my fence 6 inches? The pain in his voice cut through me. This wasn't just about property lines or fake inspections anymore. Someone had taken Harold's sense of safety and security, the very foundation of his life, and turned it into a weapon against him. Sarah stood up, pacing to the window that looked out over Harold's backyard. Tell me about this fence dispute again. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out. There's something we're missing here. Harold took a deep breath. It started about 2 months ago. Mrs. Chen next door mentioned that she thought my fence might be over the property line. Just casual conversation over the garden gate, you understand. She said she was thinking of putting in a new garden bed and wanted to make sure she knew where her property ended. That sounds reasonable enough, Danny said. Did you check? Of course I did. I pulled out my original survey from when I bought the house. The fence is exactly where it's supposed to be, maybe even a few inches on my side of the line to be safe. Harold's voice grew stronger as he talked about the facts. I showed Mrs. Chen the survey, and she seemed satisfied. Said she must have been mistaken about the measurements. So the issue was resolved, I said. Then what happened? Harold's expression darkened. About a week later, Mrs. Chen stopped talking to me altogether. Wouldn't return my waves, wouldn't chat over the fence like we had for years. Then the complaints to code enforcement started. Sarah turned from the window, her face thoughtful. Harold, in all these years living here, have you ever had any serious disputes with Mrs. Chen? Money, property damage, anything that might make her want revenge? Nothing, Harold said emphatically. We've been good neighbors. I've helped her with her groceries. She's watered my plants when I was out of town. This came out of nowhere. The room fell quiet as we all processed this information. Something wasn't adding up, and I could see Sarah working through the pieces in her mind. What if Mrs. Chen isn't the one behind this? Sarah said suddenly. What if someone else is using her initial question as cover for their own agenda? Before anyone could respond, Harold's phone buzzed with another text message. This time, when he read it, his face went completely white. What does it say? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Harold's voice was barely a whisper as he read. Final warning. Be prepared to discuss relocation options tomorrow. Some problems are easier to solve when the problem property changes hands. The text message hung in the air like a toxic cloud, transforming Harold's modest living room into something that felt suddenly foreign and unsafe. The afternoon sunlight streaming through his carefully maintained windows seemed dimmer now, as if the very walls of his home had absorbed the malicious intent behind those words. Sarah sank back into the floral armchair, her face a mixture of fury and determination. This isn't about code violations anymore. Someone wants your house, Harold. This is intimidation, pure and simple. Danny leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, studying Harold's phone as if he could somehow trace the message back to its source through sheer willpower. Harold, I need you to think carefully. Has anyone approached you about selling? Any real estate agents, developers, even casual inquiries from strangers? Harold shook his head slowly, but I could see doubt creeping into his expression. He set his phone down on the coffee table as if it were something radioactive, then walked to the window that faced the street. His shoulders sagged under the weight of realization. There was something, he said quietly, his back still turned to us. About 3 weeks ago, maybe a month, a man stopped by, said he was doing research for a property development company. Asked if I'd ever considered selling, what I thought the house might be worth. Sarah's hands clenched into fists in her lap. And you didn't think to mention this before? He seemed harmless, Harold said, turning back toward us. His face looked older somehow, carved with new lines of worry and regret. Professional, well-dressed. Said they weren't actively buying, just doing market research for future projects. I told him I wasn't interested in selling, and that was the end of it, or so I thought. The implications settled over the room like a heavy blanket. I found myself looking around Harold's home with new eyes, seeing not just the comfortable furnishings and well-maintained details, but the location, the lot size, the potential that someone else saw in this property. What did this man look like? Danny asked, though we all knew it probably wouldn't matter. Whoever was behind this had been careful, using intermediaries and anonymous complaints. Harold rubbed his temples, the gesture of a man trying to hold his world together through sheer force of will. Tall, maybe 50 years old, dark hair, expensive suit. Drove a black sedan, something foreign. He had business cards, but I didn't keep one. Sarah stood up abruptly, her energy crackling with indignation. This is classic harassment, Harold. They want to make your life so miserable that selling seems like the easy option. The constant inspections, the stress, the uncertainty about whether you'll pass the next visit. The room fell silent except for the steady tick of Harold's grandfather clock in the corner. I watched him process what Sarah had said, saw the moment when the full scope of the situation truly hit him. His home, his sanctuary, the place where he'd built decades of memories, had become a target. "What do I do?" Harold asked, and the vulnerability in his voice made my chest tight. I can't afford to keep fixing things that aren't broken, and I certainly can't afford lawyers if this gets more complicated. Danny reached over and squeezed Harold's shoulder. First, you document everything. Every text, every inspection report, every interaction. We're going to help you build a record of this harassment. Second, Sarah added, her voice taking on the tone she used when she was solving problems at work. We figure out who's really behind this. That development researcher didn't just disappear. Someone's coordinating these attacks on your home and your peace of mind. I watched Harold absorb their words, saw him straightening slightly as the support of friends began to counteract the isolation that harassment thrives on. The afternoon light was shifting now, casting longer shadows across his living room, but somehow the space felt less oppressive than it had moments before. You're not facing this alone, I told him, meaning every word. Whatever it takes, we're going to help you keep your home and your sanity. Harold's phone buzzed again, and we all tensed. But when he checked it, relief flooded his features. It's just my doctor's office, confirming an appointment. He looked up at us with something approaching a smile. For a minute there, I thought everything was a threat. That's when I realized the true cruelty of what was happening to Harold. The harassment had poisoned his sense of security so thoroughly that even routine communications had become sources of anxiety. Whoever was behind this knew exactly how to weaponize the systems meant to protect homeowners, turning them into tools of psychological warfare.